They say the most dangerous prisons are the ones without bars. The kind where you wake up every morning and live the same small life, not because someone locked you in, but because you forgot you had the key. Most people never realize how much power they have given away, not to governments, not to fate, but to people who drain their spirit in the name of love, friendship, or loyalty. But here's the truth Napoleon Hill understood well: no one can enslave your mind unless you hand them the chains yourself. Part 1. The Lesson of the Invisible Prison, 1,000 words. Eleanor had always considered herself kind, patient, and loyal. She believed those were her greatest strengths. People admired her for being the one who always said yes, who always forgave, who always showed up when others didn't. But beneath her calm smile was a tiredness she couldn't explain. She would often wake up feeling drained before the day even began, as if her soul had already spent all its energy surviving invisible battles. Her best friend, Carla, was charming and loud, the kind of person who filled every room with her energy. But Carla had a way of turning every conversation into a performance. If Eleanor shared good news, Carla somehow made it about her. If Eleanor needed support, Carla was suddenly too busy or turned the focus to her own problems. It wasn't that Carla was cruel, she was clever. She wrapped manipulation in sweetness, guilt in affection. At first, Eleanor didn't see it. She told herself she was being too sensitive, that real friendship meant accepting flaws. But over time, she began to feel smaller. Her confidence shrank. Her laughter faded. Every time she tried to set a boundary, guilt took over, whispering, "Don't be selfish. Be kind. Be understanding." One evening, exhausted and alone after another draining argument, she stumbled across an old book her grandfather had given her years ago, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. The title had always sounded like a business manual, so she had never bothered reading it. But that night, desperate for clarity, she opened it. The first line she noticed wasn't about money, it was about power. Hill wrote that the most valuable possession any human has is not wealth or status, but the ability to control their own mind. Every success or failure, every joy or misery, begins there. Eleanor paused. The words struck something deep. She began to think about Carla, not as an enemy, but as a reflection of her own habits. Why had she allowed someone to take so much from her? Why did she feel obligated to keep peace even when it cost her happiness? Hill had written that, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." Eleanor had heard quotes like that before, but now they felt personal. She realized she had been handing out permission slips, permission for others to disrespect her, to demand her time, to invade her peace. She had become a prisoner of her own kindness. For the first time, she began to question what she had been taught about love and loyalty. Maybe she had misunderstood them. Maybe love was not about endless sacrifice. Maybe loyalty did not mean staying where her soul was dying. That night, she wrote in her journal, "I have been living with open doors, letting anyone walk in and rearrange my peace. I thought being good meant being available. But being good to others has made me cruel to myself." Eleanor decided she would study her own mind like Napoleon Hill advised. Hill taught that every thought is a seed, and every emotion a signal of how we use our power. If her thoughts were full of fear, guilt, and doubt, it wasn't Carla controlling her, it was her own lack of awareness. So she began a simple practice. Each morning, she sat quietly for 10 minutes and asked herself 3 questions. 1. Who am I giving my energy to today? 2. Is this choice coming from fear or from strength? 3. What would peace do right now? At first, the answers hurt. She realized how many decisions she made just to avoid conflict. She said yes when she wanted to say no. She apologized for things she didn't do. She kept silent when her heart screamed for honesty. But the more she observed her own patterns, the clearer she became. One afternoon, Carla called her in tears, demanding she cancel her plans to help her with something trivial. Normally, Eleanor would have dropped everything. But this time, she took a breath and said, "I can't right now. I have plans." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then came the guilt trip, Carla's specialty. "I guess I know where I stand now," she said dramatically. "After everything I've done for you." The old Eleanor would have folded. But now she remembered Hill's teaching. The moment you decide to take control of your mind, you declare independence from emotional slavery. Eleanor said softly, "Carla, I love you, But I can't keep saying yes to things that leave me empty. The conversation ended awkwardly. Eleanor's heart raced. She felt guilt, but underneath it was something new, relief. She realized she had not lost control, she had gained it. Over the next few weeks, something strange happened. The more boundaries she set, the more peaceful she felt. But not everyone liked the new version of her. Carla became distant. Others accused her of changing, of being different. Yet Eleanor noticed that the right people, the calm, genuine ones, began to draw closer. Napoleon Hill once wrote, "Your only limitation is the one you set up in your own mind." Eleanor began to see that her limitation had been her fear of disapproval. She had been wealthy in potential but poor in boundaries. She started journaling every night about the invisible prison she saw others live in. People staying in jobs they hated, relationships that drained them, friendships that belittled them, all because they believed peace was something to be earned from others, not chosen from within. The truth was clear now. Every toxic person in her life existed because she allowed them to. Every boundary they crossed, every demand they made, every peace they stole happened with her silent permission. But that realization wasn't painful anymore, it was liberating. Because if she had built the prison, she could also build the door. Eleanor smiled to herself that night, whispering the same truth Napoleon Hill discovered decades ago. The mind that controls its thoughts controls its world. And for the first time, she understood that freedom didn't begin with walking away from others. It began with walking back to herself. Would you like me to continue with part 2, The Power of Awareness? In the same Napoleon Hill inspired story style, 1,000 words, easy and emotional for American audiences? Have you ever wondered why certain people feel magnetic, even when they drain your energy? Why you keep returning to the same kind of pain, dressed in different faces and names? It's not weakness, it's programming. Napoleon Hill once wrote that all habits, good or bad, are built through repetition. Toxic people survive because we repeat the same emotional responses that keep them in control. But once you understand how to reprogram your own mind, their power dissolves like mist in sunlight. Part 2, Reprogramming the Mind for Freedom, 1,000 words. Eleanor sat on her porch one quiet morning, sunlight spilling across the pages of her notebook. A cool breeze rustled the trees, but her mind was anything but calm. She had begun her journey towards self-mastery weeks ago, but the deeper she went, the more she discovered about her own conditioning. Every lesson from Napoleon Hill echoed in her mind. Your subconscious mind works continuously, whether you make it work for you or against you. Eleanor realized that the toxic people who once surrounded her didn't just appear. They were drawn to the version of her that didn't know her worth. They matched her old programming. That thought shook her. She remembered her first boyfriend, Daniel. He was charming, confident, and made her feel seen in a way no one else had. But slowly, his charm became control. He would criticize her clothes, her friends, even her laughter. When she protested, he'd twist her words until she apologized for his cruelty. She stayed because something about his intensity felt like home. But home, she now understood, had never been safe. Her childhood had taught her that love meant walking on eggshells, that peace came only after pleasing others. Daniel didn't create her wounds, he awakened them. Napoleon Hill taught that every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. For Eleanor, that benefit was awareness. She began to see that freedom wasn't about removing toxic people. It was about reprogramming the thoughts that invited them in. The old Eleanor had mistaken chaos for connection. The new Eleanor was learning to value calm, even when it felt unfamiliar. She began a ritual. Each morning, before checking her phone or reading the news, she looked in the mirror and repeated 5 simple truths. 1. My peace is my power. Point 2. I owe no one my energy. Point 3. Boundaries are love in action. Point 4. Silence is my strength. Point 5. I am the gatekeeper of my soul. At first, the affirmations felt strange, even selfish. But Hill's teachings reminded her that the subconscious mind accepts repeated statements as truth. So she persisted. Point 1 afternoon, she met her coworker Tom for coffee. Tom was funny and charismatic, but he often made jokes at her expense. In the past, she'd laughed it off. This time, when he crossed the line, she simply said, "That's not funny to me." Tom smirked, testing her like a burglar testing a lock. "You're too sensitive." he said. Old programming would have made her apologize. Instead, Eleanor smiled calmly. Maybe. But I still prefer respect. Then she changed the subject. Later, she marveled at how simple it was. She didn't need to argue or prove anything. Just clarity and silence. Hill had said that definiteness of purpose is the starting point of all achievement. For Eleanor, that purpose was peace. And definiteness meant consistency, holding firm even when others pushed back. The next test came from Carla, her old friend, who suddenly reappeared after weeks of silence. Carla called, pretending everything was normal, asking Eleanor to cancel her plans for a girls' night. I can't tonight, Eleanor said. Carla's voice sharpened. You've changed. You used to care. Eleanor paused. I still care, she replied softly. But I also care about myself now. Carla huffed, muttered something about selfishness, and hung up. Eleanor set her phone down and exhaled deeply. It didn't hurt the way it used to. She realized Carla's anger wasn't proof of betrayal. It was proof that her boundaries worked. Boundaries, she thought, were like locks on a house. They weren't there to shut people out, but to protect what mattered inside. Without them, anyone could enter, rearrange your peace, and leave chaos behind. Toxic people hated boundaries because they couldn't control what they couldn't reach. Their anger wasn't about you being cruel. It was about them losing access. The next morning, Eleanor wrote a new mantra in her journal. I am not cruel for protecting my peace. I am kind for preserving my soul. As she continued her mental training, she noticed something profound. Every time she chose calm over chaos, the grip of old habits loosened. Each no she spoke without guilt strengthened new neural pathways, rewiring her sense of worth. Napoleon Hill had taught that success, whether in business or in life, was built on definiteness, discipline, and persistence. Eleanor applied those same principles to her emotional world. She no longer negotiated with toxic people. She declared her boundaries like laws of her personal universe. This is how I expect to be treated. This is what I will not allow. This is the consequence if you cross the line. No more empty threats. No more bending point. One evening, during a family dinner, her cousin Luke, who loved to provoke arguments, began teasing her about her self-help phase. Oh, Eleanor's enlightened now, he joked. Next she'll tell us the universe talks to her. The table chuckled. Normally, Eleanor would have defended herself, trying to explain her growth. But instead, she smiled, sipped her drink, and said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than any defense. Luke grew uncomfortable and changed the subject. In that moment, Eleanor understood something Napoleon Hill called the power of self-control. He wrote that a calm mind magnetizes success because it cannot be shaken by external storms. That was her new power, strategic silence. Silence was not punishment, it was protection. It wasn't anger, it was awareness. By choosing not to engage, she conserved her energy for people and projects that mattered. She had learned to differentiate between the silent treatment, which aims to wound, and strategic silence, which aims to heal. Hill believed that all achievement begins with control of attention. Eleanor realized the same rule governed relationships. Toxic people fed on attention. Deny it, and they starved. Over time, the drama in her life began to fade, not because others changed, but because she stopped feeding it. She observed her old acquaintances from a distance now. The chronic victim who never took responsibility. The controller who disguised domination as care. The critic who drained others to feel powerful. She saw their patterns clearly. And instead of anger, she felt compassion mixed with distance. She finally understood. They were trapped in their own programming too. Freedom wasn't about hating them. It was about choosing not to play their game. As the sun set one evening, Eleanor closed her journal and whispered, I am no longer available for chaos. And in that quiet declaration, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Wholeness. The reprogramming had begun. Would you like me to continue with part 3? The Hidden War Within. Written in the same Napoleon Hill, inspired, story-based, motivational style, 1,000 words, simple and emotional for American YouTube audience. Have you ever met someone who claimed they loved you but slowly made you forget who you were? They called their jealousy passion, their control protection, their criticism honesty. At first, you believed them, because they spoke the language of love while stealing your freedom. Napoleon Hill taught that every obstacle holds the seed of equal or greater benefit. What if every toxic person in your life isn't just a curse but a classroom, a divine test designed to help you master yourself? Part 3. The Hidden Classroom of Pain. 1,000 words. Rain tapped against the window of Eleanor's small apartment as she sat with her journal open, a candle flickering beside her. Her life had grown quieter since she began setting boundaries, but now a new kind of storm was forming, not outside, but within. She found herself thinking about the people she had loved and lost. Daniel, the controller, who once texted her every hour, claiming it was because he cared. She had mistaken his surveillance for affection. Carla, the critic, who said she was just being honest. Every time she tore Eleanor's confidence apart. And then there was Mark, the manipulator, who smiled sweetly as he rewrote her reality one lie at a time. Eleanor had spent years calling it love. Now she saw it for what it was: control, criticism, confusion. Each of them had drained her in different ways, but the lesson, she realized, was the same. She closed her eyes and remembered a passage from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. Every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. If that was true, then what benefit could come from being broken by the people she trusted most? She took a deep breath and wrote a single word on the page: lesson. Hill had taught that every setback is a teacher. Maybe toxic relationships were not punishment, they were curriculum. She began to write what each one had taught her. Daniel had taught her that love without freedom is not love at all. Carla had taught her that criticism disguised as honesty is still abuse. Mark had taught her that manipulation dressed as concern is still control. Each lesson was painful, but as she wrote, she felt lighter. Like a student finally understanding a long and difficult equation. The truth, she realized, was this: life will keep sending you the same kind of person until you learn to choose differently. The controller becomes the critic becomes the manipulator, and the manipulator becomes the next heartbreak, until you finally say, no more. Hill often spoke of definiteness of decision, the power of saying yes or no with complete clarity. Eleanor saw how she had failed to use that power. She had lived indecisively, hoping people would change if she gave them enough time, enough love, enough of herself. But indecision was the soil where toxicity grew. To break free, she needed to become definite. She looked around her apartment. For the first time, it felt like her own space. No one monitoring her phone. No one criticizing her dreams. No one twisting her words. Just peace. She smiled softly. This, she whispered, is what freedom feels like. That night she dreamed she was in a classroom. The teacher's face kept changing, Daniel's, Carla's, Mark's, but the lesson written on the chalkboard never did. It said, how much will you sacrifice for the illusion of love? She woke with tears in her eyes. The dream wasn't cruel, it was clarifying. Every toxic person in her life had asked her that same question in different ways. And every time, she had answered by giving a little more of herself away. Her peace, her self-respect, her joy, all sacrificed for approval. But life wasn't testing her endurance. It was testing her wisdom. Hill wrote that. Your only limitations are those you set up in your own mind. Eleanor saw how her mind had trapped her in patterns of self-sacrifice. She had mistaken endurance for strength. But strength, she now understood, wasn't staying in the fire, it was walking out of it. Her mentor at work, Mrs. Harlow, had once told her, you don't have to stay poisoned to learn that the drink is toxic. Those words returned to her now, echoing with truth. Eleanor realized that forgiveness, growth, and release didn't mean staying in dysfunction to prove you could handle it. They meant taking the lesson and leaving the classroom. She began to write again. If I attract controllers, I'm meant to learn freedom. If I attract critics, I'm meant to learn self-worth. If I attract manipulators, I'm meant to learn truth. Each toxic relationship had mirrored the places she didn't yet love herself enough. That wasn't shameful, it was revelation. She remembered how Mark had told her she was too emotional, how she tried to become colder to keep him happy. Now, she saw that her empathy wasn't the problem. Her lack of boundaries was. Hill believed in the law of cause and effect. Eleanor began to see how her inner beliefs were the cause, and her toxic relationships were the effect. Change the belief, and the pattern would end. Her belief used to be, if I love them enough, they will heal. Her new belief was, if I love myself enough, I will heal. That shift changed everything. She no longer felt the urge to fix broken people. She could feel compassion without stepping into their chaos. She could say, I understand your pain, and still choose distance. Because love without wisdom becomes bondage. Compassion without boundaries becomes destruction. She thought of Hill's words again. Self-discipline begins with mastery of your thoughts. She smiled. This was her discipline now, not reacting, not rescuing, not reliving the same pain in new forms. She poured herself another cup of tea, the rain still whispering against the window. Outside, the world felt fresh and alive. Inside, she felt lighter than she had in years. She whispered softly to herself, the lesson ends when I choose me. For the first time, she believed it. Every toxic person who had ever walked into her life wasn't there to destroy her. They were mirrors reflecting her unhealed parts. Now that she could see the reflection clearly, she no longer needed the mirror. Eleanor stood, closed her notebook, and blew out the candle. The flame went out, but the light within her grew brighter. Napoleon Hill once said, You are the master of your fate, the captain of your soul. Eleanor smiled. She had finally taken the wheel. The classroom of pain had served its purpose, and class was officially dismissed. Would you like me to continue with part 4? The power of distance and the art of letting go. Same style, storytelling with Napoleon Hill philosophy, 1,000 words, engaging hook, easy for YouTube audience. They say the most dangerous prisons are not made of iron bars, but of invisible walls built inside the mind. Many live their entire lives locked behind those walls, mistaking control for love and fear for loyalty. But what if the door to that prison was never locked? What if freedom was simply a choice, a decision to see the truth that has always been in front of you? Part 4. The Awakening of Power. Evelyn sat by the window of her small apartment, watching the morning light pour through the blinds. For years, that same light had felt harsh, almost accusing, as if it was trying to expose the parts of her life she wished to hide. But today, it felt different, warm, alive, forgiving. Something inside her had shifted, something subtle yet irreversible. She had begun to see clearly. The realization came not in a flash of anger, but in a quiet understanding. She had allowed too much for too long. She had mistaken guilt for responsibility, criticism for guidance, and manipulation for love. The people she once thought she couldn't live without were, in truth, the ones draining the very essence of who she was. Evelyn remembered something she once read from Napoleon Hill. Every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. For years, she hadn't understood it. But now, after surviving emotional storms and silent wars, she saw what he meant. The pain had been her teacher. The toxicity had been her classroom. Every betrayal, every heartbreak, every moment of confusion was a mirror showing her where she had abandoned herself. Hill taught that success begins with understanding one's own mind. And Evelyn realized the same rule applies to freedom. The battlefield was not outside of her, it was within. The toxic people around her had never stolen her power. They had only borrowed what she had willingly given. She closed her eyes and remembered the critic, the one who always found fault in everything she did. He called it honesty, but it was poison disguised as truth. Every time she accepted his judgment, she handed him a piece of her confidence. And the manipulator, the one who smiled while twisting her thoughts, he never forced her to believe his lies. She had doubted her own truth first. Evelyn felt a strange calmness. She realized she had been studying other people all her life, trying to understand their moods, their reactions, their expectations, while never studying herself. That was the first mistake. Napoleon Hill once said, Self-discipline begins with the mastery of your thoughts. If you do not control your thoughts, you cannot control your needs. Evelyn saw how she had been controlled, not by others' strength, but by her own lack of boundaries. She had believed that love required endurance, that care meant carrying others' pain, that peace meant silence. But now she knew that peace without truth was just another kind of prison. The moment she accepted that truth, the energy in her home began to shift. It wasn't magic, it was alignment. She started small. She stopped answering calls that came with drama. She said no, without apology. She spent her mornings writing affirmations instead of rereading old messages. At first, it felt wrong, selfish even. The toxic voices in her head, echoes from people she had once loved, whispered that she was cruel, cold, ungrateful. But she kept going, and then something incredible happened. The world outside her began to mirror her new state of mind. The same people who once dominated her space began to fade. Some grew angry at her distance, others tried to guilt her back into submission. But Evelyn had learned one of the oldest truths: energy cannot lie. Once you raise your vibration, those who thrive on chaos cannot breathe in your air anymore. She began to notice how her body reacted to people. Her shoulders would tense before her mind even realized something was wrong. Her stomach would tighten in warning when someone's words carried manipulation. Her intuition, the voice she had long ignored, became her closest ally. Napoleon Hill often spoke about the power of a definite purpose. For him, it was the key to success. For Evelyn, it became the key to emotional survival. Her new purpose was simple: to protect her peace. That was her mission, her focus, her guiding light. As she moved through her days, she began to see patterns. The critic's voice returned in others, the manipulator's tactics reappeared in new faces, but she recognized them instantly. She didn't engage. She didn't defend herself. She simply smiled and walked away. Hill believed that thoughts, once mixed with emotion and faith, become powerful realities. Evelyn started feeding her mind with new thoughts, thoughts of strength, boundaries, and self-respect. She repeated them daily until they became her new truth. Slowly, the world began to respond differently. Opportunities that once passed her by began to appear. People who valued honesty and kindness entered her life. And for the first time in years, she slept peacefully. But the journey wasn't without tests. One evening, she received a message from the manipulator: apologies, promises, familiar words dripping with nostalgia. For a brief moment, her heart softened. The old Evelyn would have replied. But this time, she paused. She heard Hill's wisdom echo in her mind. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Evelyn smiled, deleted the message, and felt a wave of freedom wash over her. That single act, that quiet moment of self-respect, felt like reclaiming a kingdom she didn't know she owned. She realized that forgiveness didn't mean reopening the door. It meant closing it with peace in her heart. It meant releasing the poison without keeping the bottle. Her transformation was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, internal, sacred. Each small choice to protect her energy was an act of rebellion against her old self. Each no was a declaration of freedom. Each boundary was a bridge to peace. By the end of that year, Evelyn looked back and barely recognized the woman she once was. She had learned that love without respect is control, that care without boundaries is chaos, and that kindness without strength is weakness. Hill's teachings had taken root in her soul. She understood now that all power begins in the mind. And once she mastered her thoughts, the toxic people who once seemed invincible became powerless shadows of her past. As the sun set outside her window, Evelyn whispered to herself, "This is what freedom feels like." It wasn't about escaping others. It was about returning home to herself, because the greatest victory you will ever achieve is not over others, but over your own fear to choose yourself. Would you like me to continue with part 5 in the same style, story-based, 1,000 words, simple and emotional, with Napoleon Hill's principles woven in? Hook, they say rock bottom has a basement. But sometimes, that dark place you fear most is not the end, it's the beginning. The moment when you stop trying to fix the unfixable and start rebuilding yourself. It's the point when your soul whispers, "No more," and you finally listen. That's where real power begins, not in fighting others, but in mastering yourself. Part 5. The power of walking away. The day Evelyn decided to walk away was not a loud one. There were no fights, no tears, no grand declarations. Just silence, a calm, steady silence that came from deep inside. For years, she had thought that strength meant holding on. But now, she realized true strength was learning to let go. She remembered something she once read in Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. Every man's mind becomes magnetized with the dominating thoughts which he holds in his mind. She thought about that line for a long time. Her mind had been magnetized with fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being misunderstood, fear of disappointing people who would never be satisfied anyway. No wonder she kept attracting pain. Now, she was ready to change the magnet. Evelyn began her transformation quietly. She started by writing a letter, not to the toxic people who had hurt her, but to herself. "I forgive you," she wrote. "I forgive you for staying too long, for ignoring the signs, for confusing love with obligation. You did not know better. But now you do." As her pen moved across the paper, something inside her began to heal. Napoleon Hill taught that before one can achieve success, one must first achieve clarity of purpose. Evelyn's purpose was no longer to please others. Her purpose was peace. Her mission was freedom. At first, the silence that followed her withdrawal felt strange. She was used to constant noise, calls, arguments, guilt trips, emotional storms. But now there was quiet. The peace felt foreign, almost uncomfortable, like learning to breathe new air after living underwater. In that quiet, her thoughts grew louder. She remembered all the times she had said yes when she wanted to say no, all the times she had forgiven someone who was not sorry, all the times she had begged for understanding from people who had no intention of giving it. The truth hit hard. She had been her own captor. Napoleon Hill once said that. "You have absolute control over only one thing, your thoughts." Evelyn realized this was the foundation of freedom. No one could take her peace unless she handed it over. No one could make her feel small without her agreement. The toxic people in her life had never taken her power, they had simply used what she gave them. That day, she began a new practice. Every morning, before she looked at her phone or opened her emails, she stood in front of the mirror and said, "I choose me today." At first, it felt silly. But over time, those 4 words began to rewire her mind. They became her daily prayer, her personal declaration of independence. The world started testing her resolve almost immediately. The manipulator sent another message, full of apologies and promises. The critic left a voicemail, dripping with guilt and false concern. Evelyn stared at her phone and smiled. The old her would have replied, explaining, defending, justifying. But the new her didn't owe anyone an explanation. She deleted the messages and whispered Hill's wisdom under her breath. "Tell the world what you intend to do, but first show it." This time, she didn't announce her growth, she lived it. Days turned into weeks, and her life began to shift. She noticed that as she created distance from dysfunction, new opportunities began to appear. She was offered a position at work that she once thought she wasn't qualified for. She met people who spoke peace instead of chaos, who built her up instead of tearing her down. The universe, it seemed, had been waiting for her to clean her space. Evelyn began journaling again, something she hadn't done in years. Each night, she wrote one truth she had learned that day. Love without respect is control. Peace without honesty is fear. Boundaries are not barriers, they are doors to self-respect. As her list grew, so did her confidence. She started understanding what Hill meant by organized thinking. He believed that clarity of thought leads to clarity of action. For Evelyn, that meant being intentional with every choice, who she spent time with, what she allowed in her mind, and how she responded to negativity. She stopped apologizing for her boundaries. When someone called her cold, she smiled. When someone accused her of changing, she agreed. Because she had changed. The old Evelyn lived in reaction. The new Evelyn lived in creation. One evening, while walking through a quiet park, she remembered her past self, the one who had bent over backward to keep everyone happy. She almost laughed out loud at how far she had come. She no longer needed validation from those who never truly saw her. She no longer chased after people who walked away. Hill had once written, "Your big opportunity may be right where you are now." Evelyn realized her opportunity wasn't in a new job, a new city, or a new relationship. It was in this exact moment, the opportunity to live as her truest self. As the sun began to set, she whispered to herself, "This is what power feels like." Not control over others, but control over her mind. Not manipulation, but mastery. Not revenge, but release. Later that week, she visited her favorite cafe, the one she used to go to during her darkest days. The same barista smiled and said, "You look different." Evelyn smiled back and said, "I am." In that moment, she understood what Napoleon Hill had been trying to teach all along, that every person holds within them the power to rise above circumstance, to transform pain into wisdom, to turn suffering into purpose. Evelyn had not just escaped toxic people. She had transcended them. She had learned that walking away was not running from weakness. It was walking towards strength. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living. Because real freedom doesn't come from fixing others. It comes from freeing yourself. And once you do, you never go back. Would you like me to continue with part 6, final part, next? The transformation and conclusion of Evelyn's journey, showing how she uses her new power to create a fulfilling life? Hook. Sometimes the greatest victory doesn't come with applause. It comes in silence, in the moment you look in the mirror and realize you've become the person you always needed. That's when you understand the real meaning of power. Not the power to control others, but the power to master yourself. This is not the end of Evelyn's story. It's the beginning of her becoming. Part 6. The mastery of peace. Months had passed since Evelyn walked away from her toxic past. The old world that once drained her had faded into distant memory. For the first time, her mornings began with gratitude, not anxiety. She woke up before the sunrise, brewed her coffee, and sat by her window to think. Not to worry, not to plan, just to think. She had learned this discipline from Napoleon Hill himself, through his timeless teaching that every great success begins with a definite purpose. Hill said, "The starting point of all achievement is desire." Evelyn understood now that her deepest desire was not fame, wealth, or approval. It was peace. Real, unshakable peace, and she was finally living it. But peace, she discovered, was not passive. It was not the absence of noise, it was the art of mastering it. There were still moments when old thoughts tried to creep back in. The memories, the guilt, the temptation to over-explain herself. The difference now was that she no longer fought them. She simply observed them, like clouds passing across a clear sky. Napoleon Hill taught that the subconscious mind is always listening, always recording. So Evelyn became careful with her words. She stopped saying, "I'm tired." Instead, she said, "I'm recharging." She stopped saying, "I'm scared." Instead, she said, "I'm preparing." Every word became a seed, and she was finally planting wisely. Her new peace began to influence every part of her life. At work, she led with calm confidence. Her coworkers noticed the change. Her ideas were clear, her decisions decisive. She no longer sought approval from anyone, and ironically, that made people respect her more. Hill had once written, "When one is truly ready for a thing, it puts in its appearance." Opportunities started showing up in unexpected ways, projects, partnerships, friendships that reflected her new energy. Evelyn started teaching others what she had learned. She began mentoring young women who struggled with boundaries and self-worth. She didn't preach, she shared stories. Stories about losing herself and finding her way back. About mistaking attachment for love. About discovering that peace is not found, it's built, choice by choice, day by day. One afternoon, while speaking at a small community event, a young woman asked her, "How do you know you've really healed?" Evelyn smiled. "You know you've healed," she said, "when peace stops feeling like loneliness." The crowd went silent. In that moment, she realized she had become the kind of voice she once needed to hear. At home, Evelyn surrounded herself with beauty, not luxury, but meaning. Books that fed her mind, plants that reminded her to grow, and sunlight that filled her space with warmth. Every corner of her home reflected the new version of herself, simple, strong, and alive. Still, there were moments of solitude that tested her resolve. Some nights, she would look through old photographs and feel a flicker of sadness. But instead of running from it, she thanked it. That sadness was proof of her growth. Proof that she had cared deeply, loved sincerely, and survived completely. She understood now what Hill meant when he wrote, "Every adversity brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage." Her pain had not destroyed her, it had instructed her. Evelyn began writing her own journal of lessons, calling it the Laws of Inner Freedom. Each page was filled with simple truths she had earned through struggle. 1. You cannot change others by suffering for them. 2. Love without respect is dependency. 3. Peace is not given, it is chosen. 4. Silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. 5. You are not selfish for saving yourself first. Her journal became her manual for living. She carried it everywhere, like a compass pointing toward her true north point. One evening, she sat on her porch watching the sunset. The world was painted in gold and crimson, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a quiet joy that needed no audience. She remembered Hill's principle of the mastermind, the idea that when two minds come together in harmony, they create a force greater than either alone. Evelyn smiled. She had finally formed her own mastermind, her conscious mind, her subconscious mind, and her spirit, all working together in perfect unity. Peace, she realized, was not something you find outside yourself. It's something you build from within, through faith, discipline, and purpose. Hill had taught that every person is the master of their fate, the captain of their soul. Evelyn now understood what that meant. It wasn't about controlling life. It was about commanding your response to it. Then came the moment of full circle clarity. She received a message from someone who had once been toxic in her life. The words were familiar: apologies, nostalgia, promises of change. But this time, she felt no anger, no pull, no fear. Just compassion. She didn't need revenge or validation. She didn't need to prove anything. She simply wished them peace, and meant it. That was when she knew she was free. She looked out at the horizon and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the person, not to the past, but to herself, for having the courage to choose peace over pain, clarity over confusion, growth over guilt. Napoleon Hill once wrote, "There are no limitations to the mind except those we acknowledge." Evelyn smiled because she had stopped acknowledging limits long ago. She had transformed her pain into power, her heartbreak into purpose, her silence into strength. And so her story ended not with a bang, but with balance. Not with a final goodbye, but with a new beginning. She had mastered the greatest lesson of all, that the richest life is the one lived in alignment with peace, purpose, and self-respect. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and felt the quiet truth fill her heart. She had not just healed. She had evolved. The end. Call to action. If Evelyn's story touched your heart, remember, you have that same power within you. You can choose peace. You can walk away from chaos. You can rebuild your life, just like she did. Subscribe, share, and comment if you're ready to begin your own journey toward inner freedom and lasting peace.